Today, we're going to crack open one of the most foundational texts in the world, the Book of Genesis. But we're not just going to retell the stories. No, we're going to look at it through a different lens, as a deeply structured text, almost like a literary code with these hidden layers of meaning, all based on some really detailed analysis.
Look, we all know the big ones, right? Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel. But what if those famous stories are just, well, scratching the surface? What if they're actually built on a framework of recurring themes, clever wordplay, and these deliberate parallels that are telling a much bigger, more unified story?
All right, let's just dive right in with a really powerful example. So, on the surface, the story of Abraham and Isaac is this incredibly dramatic test of one man's faith. But according to this way of interpreting things, it's something way more. It's what's called a type, a preordained event that's acting like a blueprint, foreshadowing a future divine sacrifice. This idea that the past is actually an echo of the future is totally central to unlocking this Genesis code.
So, you're probably asking, how exactly do we find these echoes and blueprints? Well, it's not about guesswork. The source material lays out a pretty systematic process, almost like a toolkit for decoding this ancient text. Okay, so the first step in this process is to compare multiple ancient translations. You're looking at things like the Septuagint, which is an early Greek version, and the Masoretic text, the Standard Hebrew. You're trying to catch all those subtle differences. Next, you analyze key Hebrew words. The original language is just packed with nuances that so often get lost in translation. And finally, the analysis starts identifying these recurring themes and parallels, basically tracing connections that weave through the entire book. Now, this whole process actually has a name. It's called exegesis, and the core idea here is absolutely crucial. The goal isn't to force our own modern ideas onto the text. Instead, it's about carefully drawing out the meaning that the original author actually embedded within its structure. It's a process of discovery, not invention.
Let's look at a quick example of this in action. The name Noah. In Hebrew, it's linked to words for rest and repose, but the source points out this really clever wordplay. Noah's father, Lamech, names him and says, "This one will bring us comfort." Now, the Hebrew verb for to comfort sounds a lot like Noah's name. So right there, in a single name, you have this whole generation's hope for relief from a cursed world, all encoded in a little linguistic pun. Pretty cool, right?
So, what starts to happen when you apply this whole toolkit? You begin to see that the book isn't just some random collection of family stories. A central thread starts to emerge. And here's where it gets really interesting. The author of Genesis seems to be incredibly selective. So, after Cain kills Abel, the family line in the story doesn't follow Cain, who was the firstborn. Instead, it pivots to Adam and Eve's third son, Seth. This signals a really deliberate choice. The author is tracing what the source calls a line of promise. And you can actually trace this line so clearly. It starts with Adam, then it bypasses Cain to go to Seth, and it continues down for 10 generations, all the way to Noah, the guy who survives the flood. From Noah, the line is then traced through his son Shem, and that eventually leads to the patriarch Abraham. And then finally to Isaac, the long-awaited son of the promise. It's presented as this one continuous, unbroken thread stretching right across the entire book.
Okay, so this brings us to what might be the most complex and honestly fascinating layer of interpretation that the source talks about. This idea that these historical events aren't just history, they're actually echoes of the future. This whole concept is called typology. So a type is a real person or a real event that functions as a kind of prophetic pattern. Think of it like a historical preview, something that sets the stage for a future, even more significant event, which is known as the antitype. A perfect example from the source is this really mysterious figure named Melchizedek. He just shows up for a few verses in Genesis 14. He's a king and a priest, and he blesses Abraham. Now, in this analysis, he's not some random character who just pops in and out. No, he is a type of a future king-priest, and he's establishing a pattern that's going to be referenced thousands of years later.
And all of this leads to what the source presents as the ultimate type in Genesis. The parallels that are drawn between Abraham's offering of Isaac and the later crucifixion of Jesus are, well, they're pretty striking. You have a beloved, only son in both stories. Both events take place on a mountain in the land of Moriah. In one story, Isaac carries the wood for his own sacrifice. In the other, Jesus carries his own wooden cross. In both, you see a father willing to offer his son. And, crucially, a ram is provided as a substitute for Isaac, which is seen as foreshadowing the idea of Jesus as the ultimate substitute.
So when you start putting all these layers together, you've got the linguistic details, the narrative threads, these typological echoes, the Book of Genesis really starts to transform.
The big takeaway from the source's analysis is really this. Genesis isn't just a scrapbook of disconnected stories. It's presented as this unified, intricately designed work of literature. It's a seamless novel where every single plot point, every character, every theme is purposefully driving toward one single, overarching story.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating question, doesn't it? If a text this ancient, this well-known, can contain such deep, hidden structures, what other stories or myths or histories that we think we know inside and out might also hold secret layers, just waiting to be decoded?